Hey everyone, we know how hard it can be to keep up with the latest news in Israel, so if you haven't had the time to stay on top of what's what in the Holy Land, have no worries. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is ILTV's Weekly Review.
Passover has officially ended and Israel is headed into the weekend, but the numbers keep on rising. Roughly 12,600 people and counting have now been diagnosed with the novel coronavirus in the state of Israel, with 174 in serious condition and at least 140 requiring ventilators. The death toll has also now risen to 141, but the good news is that over 2,600 Israelis have now recovered from COVID-19 too. Still, one of the most alarming cases here in Israel is of an 8-day-old baby who was diagnosed with the deadly virus after being brought into the hospital with a high fever, and his mother was simultaneously diagnosed. He is currently in good medical condition, however, and on the way to recovery. Then, on another positive note, flights have just landed in Israel with some much-needed ventilators and coronavirus testing materials. A Korean air jet has brought in enough chemical reagents to conduct around 100,000 COVID-19 tests all the way from South Korea, and along with 50,000 personal protective suits for medical staff. Israel's defense ministry has also secured another 100 ventilators from the U.S. on a cargo flight from New York. And meanwhile, Israel has now passed its goal of carrying out more than 10,000 tests per day, with over 11,000 Israelis tested on just Tuesday alone. But while Israel is just managing to stay afloat with medical equipment, other countries aren't faring the same. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu allegedly had to turn down a request to purchase ventilators from the United Kingdom and Spain last week, saying Israel needs them for itself. Now, the nationwide lockdown has been lifted now that Passover is over, although many restrictions are still in place, and the government is convening today to discuss Israel's exit strategy out of the coronavirus crisis.
גם אם הקורונה תהיה בנסיגה, אין ביטחון שהיא לא תחזור. הנגיף שוב עלול לתקוף, וכבר היו דברים מעולם. ולכן צעדי הזהירות ייושמו בהדרגה בעולם ובארץ, עד שימצא חיסון לקורונה.
Israel is planning to gradually remove the restrictions that have now been put into place to help stem the spread of COVID-19, but not everybody agrees on how to do that. The health ministry believes that returning to work and daily life can only occur when Israel sees between 30 to 50 new cases of coronavirus per day. But as of Wednesday, there are still hundreds of new patients being diagnosed on a daily basis. The finance ministry, however, is arguing that the economy just can't take much more. Right now, the unemployment rate has passed an unprecedented 26.1% in Israel, with more than 1 million people out of work. And the finance ministry argues that the economy will not be able to rebound if restrictions aren't removed quickly. For now, it's believed that starting from the beginning of next week, April 19th, employees in the high-tech, finance, and industrial sectors will be able to start going back to work. Small standalone stores may also be able to open. Minister of Defense Naftali Bennett is pushing for something even more extreme, though: the opening of 100% of Israel's businesses except for those centered on entertainment, recreation, and large shopping centers, with employees over the age of 65 or with underlying health issues required to stay at home. But again, these are all just reports, and nothing has been decided yet. Now that Passover is over, however, starting this morning at 5 a.m., Israelis are now allowed to leave their hometowns for essential reasons only. Bakeries have also been allowed to start operating at 2 a.m. for Israelis who want to end the Passover holiday with a nice carb-filled treat. Closures have been eased in Bnei Brak, an ultra-orthodox suburb of Tel Aviv that has been one of the hardest hit areas by the coronavirus. Public transportation is still banned in the town, but Bnei Brak is now being labeled as a restricted area that will permit private cars to enter and exit. 700 residents will also be evacuated to isolation in coronavirus hotels. Unlike Bnei Brak, the hardest-hit Jerusalem neighborhoods will continue to remain under lockdown until at least April 19th.
On Friday, a little less than 6,000 people were tested. The health ministry hopes to bring that number up to 20,000 tests once new equipment is installed in labs across Israel as well. Now, in the meantime, as the coronavirus continues its rampage, everyone wants to know who is the most at risk of contracting COVID-19 here in Israel.
The Israeli Health Ministry has just released new data about the first 96 people to have passed away from COVID-19 in Israel. And stats show that almost all those who have passed away from COVID-19 have been elderly or have suffered from pre-existing conditions. 54% have been male and 46% female, but the death rate based on sex is extremely low. The oldest person to have passed away from coronavirus in Israel was age 98, and the youngest was 37, bringing the average age of COVID-19 death to 81 years old in Israel. But when you look at the collective, less than 3% of Israelis who have died from coronavirus were under the age of 60. 9% were between 60 and 69, 21% were between 70 and 79, and a whopping 47% were over the age of 80. In terms of location, Jerusalem has the most coronavirus deaths, a total of 26% of all cases. Bat Yam, Bnei Brak, and Tel Aviv follow afterwards, with 8%, 7%, and 5% of deaths respectively. But people have passed away from COVID-19 in over 34 different Israeli cities.
All right, moving on. As the world muddles through this terrible crisis, many are busy playing the blame game. And in Israel in particular, with disproportionately high infection rates, the ultra-orthodox communities are getting the most of it. But Israeli leaders are now condemning the wild incitement against Haredim. And analysts say that instead they're victims of poor information about the virus.
The government of Israel is now getting ready to shut down nearly 24 ultra-Orthodox enclaves across the country, including hundreds of thousands of people. And it's true that the majority of new coronavirus cases seem to be coming from the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi populations, especially as many, including Health Minister and UTJ Party Chief Yaakov Litzman, have ignored new government regulations and have since become infected. Some Haredim have even assaulted medical personnel and police while conducting tests and enforcing closures, leading to widespread anti-Haredi sentiments which Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Rivlin have condemned. But why are the Haredim seemingly ignoring restrictions that can save their lives? Well, for the most part, they're not. They just weren't told the full horror story. And many are blaming the Haredi political leadership for failing to fill them in. In most ultra-Orthodox communities, residents are more or less isolated from the general secular and non-Jewish public. And on top of that, there is rarely access to mainstream television, computers, internet, or smartphones to keep impurities away. So the result is that even after receiving reports from the government and health officials, community rabbis had very poor methods of distributing this information, let alone describing how dire the information was. That being said, religious party lawmakers, including both United Torah Judaism and Shas chiefs Yaakov Litzman and Aryeh Deri, have also made poor calls amidst this crisis, including fighting against city quarantines and synagogue closures. And now, Litzman and his wife are both infected, and much of Israel's top leadership is in quarantine.
With a narrow majority, the Israeli Knesset has passed an amendment to basic law allowing for a 90 billion shekel or $25 billion stimulus package.
In a vote of 62-0, Israel's government is now approving another financial rescue deal intended to help Israeli citizens during the coronavirus pandemic. With over 25% unemployment and rising now reported, this bill will allow adaptations to the annual Knesset budget and deficit caps so that citizens can receive needed financial aid. That 62 vote count may not have come from where you'd first expect, though. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Health Minister Yaakov Litzman, among others, were absent for the vote as they're in quarantine. Then other members of the right-wing bloc, like the entire Yamina party, skipped the vote in alleged protest over unity negotiations with the Blue and White Party. So who came to the rescue? Well, it was 3 final votes from the mostly Arab Joint List that pushed the bill through the plenum. And the supposed irony of the Likud begging the Joint List for help is not lost on Joint List MK Ahmad Tibi, who tweeted about it later. At any rate, the aid package includes a 500 shekel stipend for children with a maximum of 4 child stipends per family. Then there's another 950 shekels stipend for the elderly and a rise in unemployment pay. And simultaneously, over $4.3 million has now also been collected and earmarked for Holocaust survivors who are especially at risk during the coronavirus crisis. This was a private effort, however, organized by the New York-based Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, a group that represents Jewish victims of the Nazis in claims against members of the former German regime.
Now, for some good news, a dangerous shortage of coronavirus testing materials may actually be a blessing in disguise. That's because researchers at the Hebrew University say they've now developed a new COVID-19 test, and best of all, it's faster, cheaper, and recyclable. ILTV's Aaron Porras has the details.
Now, Israel is in a bind. Coronavirus tests are in high demand, and even with the kits, a shortage of the reagent used in the tests has crippled Israel's daily testing capacity. So after searching for an alternative, researchers at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem are now announcing that they've succeeded in developing a new test. And not only is the new test both 4 to 10 times faster and cheaper than the conventional tests on the market, it's also just as accurate and created with readily available materials. So how does it work?
Well, the current tests extract RNA from a patient sample and it looks for the virus's RNA mixed in. And the new test does the same thing, but it uses magnetic beads in the process, which can be sanitized and reused. Also, the test can be performed manually and robotically, and already it's been used on hundreds of samples that have proved the test's efficacy. Finally, though, if you thought the team was finished with this result, guess again. Lead researchers Professor Nir Friedman and Dr. Naomi Haviv say that the next step is to create a method for testing 15,000 people at the same time. And Friedman says that there are very positive indications that encourage us to believe it can work.
All right, moving on, Blue and White Party leader Benny Gantz has failed to form a coalition, and now with the mandate returned, President Rivlin has started a new countdown.
For only the second time in Israeli history, the Knesset has now been given 3 weeks to negotiate a government, or another round of elections begins. That means that any MK can now be prime minister, as long as he or she gathers 61 supporting votes. But can any MK actually do it? Israeli lawmakers have been fighting to form a government for over a year and a half, and in the midst of a pandemic, following 3 elections, billions of dollars in campaigning, and exhausting negotiations, it looked like party leaders Benny Gantz and Benjamin Netanyahu were finally on the verge of signing a deal.
נתניהו זה רגע האמת שלנו. זה או ממשלת חירום לאומית או חלילה בחירות רביעיות יקרות ומיותרות בשעת משבר.
But the unthinkable has happened. Gantz's deadline is come and gone, and now President Rivlin has tasked the Knesset at large with finishing the job. That said, a unity government isn't out of the question just yet. The 3-week extension in the Knesset can be used to further talks between Netanyahu and Gantz too, and reportedly that's exactly what they're doing. Negotiating teams from the Likud and the Blue and White parties have spent most of the holidays in talks, and they've already agreed to continue meeting even after Gantz's mandate comes up.
And now for some good news, the freshwater Sea of Galilee, or Kinneret in Israel, is now at its highest level since 2004 after a night of heavy rainfall.
The Sea of Galilee is Israel's main freshwater reservoir, but a lack of rain over many years has seen the lake's level drop sharply. Now it's risen another 2.5 centimeters over the weekend and is at over 208 meters below sea level. That's just 16 centimeters below the upper red line threshold, which is where the lake would be in danger of overflowing. And if it manages to go over that line, then the Degania Dam will be open to allow excess flow into the Jordan River. But don't get your hopes up just yet. Despite 2 years of relatively high rainfall, the dam hasn't been open since 2013.
In other news, Israel has now again been ranked as one of the safest, if not the safest country to be in amidst the threat of the coronavirus pandemic. This according to a recent report by Forbes magazine. But the question is, how did Israel respond so well? Well, the answer, of course, lies in Israel's startup nation mentality.
Since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, Israeli scientists and researchers have been looking for ways to fight back, and the search has apparently paid off. Because not only is Israel ranking at the top as a safe place to be, it's ranking at 5th among 20 for innovative solutions to COVID-19. The United States, meanwhile, is at first, followed by Canada, Estonia, and Switzerland. But the ranking is compiled by Israeli startup research center Startup Blink, and in partnership with similar companies like Meetup, SEMrush, and Crunchbase. And the ranking looks at startup innovations across several categories, including treatment, diagnostics, and prevention. Now, among the most practical innovations, however, is the coronavirus check-in and tracker developed by Diagnostic Robotics in Israel. It consists of a short questionnaire that's been sent to several million Israelis. But the results have been accurate tracking of the spread of the virus, leading to actionable suggestions for the government. For example, the company saw, quote, worrying data from Migdal HaEmek, Tveria, and Ashkelon over the weekend. And sure enough, Monday morning, the government issued a lockdown over these same cities.
All right, now with the coronavirus putting day-to-day life on pause all around the world, there are major industries that are feeling the pressure. Others, meanwhile, are taking the unscheduled calm as a well-deserved break. And ILTV's Nittany Manson brings us the story.
All around Israel, the effects of the coronavirus are clear, from the streets of Tel Aviv to the now silent Via Dolorosa, or Way of Sorrows, in Jerusalem. The once packed holy site is quiet, and with only days to go to the Easter holiday, people are finding it strange.
Now it is a little bit sad to see that the old city is empty and that, in fact, nobody is able to walk the Via Dolorosa, but we know that in this moment so many people are walking a personal Via Dolorosa, because when I think to those who are in the hospitals and in the houses fighting with coronavirus. In some way they are working very hard and personal Via Dolorosa, and I hope that for every one of them the end be a resurrection.
But while the silence of COVID-19 hangs in the air, surprisingly, there are those who are benefiting in a way. Wild animals, for one, have been taking to the abandoned streets all over the world. And as for those in captivity, well, the inhabitants of the Ramat Gan safari are taking the lack of crowds as a nice break. Especially the new additions to the zoo, who are getting some intimate time alone to get to know their mothers as well as the zoo staff.
Animals in the safari, since there are no visitors, they have less interaction, it's quieter for them, they're not sure what's going on, but the keepers come to see them a lot, they give them lots more exciting things to interact with.
The children, I'm sure, miss the animals very much. It's very difficult for us at this time. It's sad for us that, you know, the zoo is so quiet. We miss the rush and the hustle and bustle of the families coming here at this time of year. But hopefully this all will finish soon and we can go back to normal, and all the animals here can go back to a normal life here.
All right, now isolation at home can be really hard, and many of us find it easier to pass the time because we have smartphones, smart TVs, and video call technology. But what about our elderly who not only already suffer from higher rates of loneliness, but are also not the most tech savvy? Well, in a way, there is an app for that, and ILTV's Nittany Manson has the details.
We live in a digital age, and it's becoming more and more important to keep the aging population in the technical loop. Well, a new project is doing just that, and at a time when it's needed the most. Now, up until just a few weeks ago, Israeli entrepreneurs Gabi Arnovitz and Uriel Shuraki have been teaching smartphone classes to the elderly across several brick-and-mortar locations in Jerusalem, and they've been operating under their project Made in JLM. But then with lockdowns and social isolation orders coming into play, they had to get creative. So Arnovitz and Shuraki teamed up with Shuraki's cousin, David Suraki, who helped them develop an online course. And this course, which is offered free of charge, has already attracted over 1,000 students in just 2 weeks. The course consists of a series of Hebrew videos that are uploaded to a dedicated YouTube channel. Students receive the links via a WhatsApp group that you can join off the course's website. And the lessons each include a sample phone screen with an easy-to-follow direction and cursors. And so far, the online class is covering how to work in Google Drive, Facebook, WhatsApp, Zoom, and more.
Now, in other news, Easter 2020 has arrived, and with it, a miracle. For the first time in over half a century, the Jordan River area, which is believed to be the baptismal site of Jesus Christ, is free of landmines.
After 53 long years, Qasr al-Yahud is safe to explore. 8 monasteries and several smaller chapels line the banks of the Jordan River at Qasr al-Yahud, where Jesus was reportedly baptized. And translated to Castle of the Jews, it's also believed to be where Jews enter the Holy Land for the first time after leaving Egypt. But for decades following the 1968 Six-Day War, the area has been a relative dead zone. Thousands of landmines had been planted by the IDF there, and only now have they finally been cleared. Thanks primarily to the Halo Trust, a UK-based demining group, operations to clear Qasr al-Yahud began in 2018. And on April 9th, the final daisy chain of 500 explosive mines was set off. Now, all that needs to be done is a massive amount of restoration. As you can imagine, the upkeep has been lacking. And speaking with the BBC, Halo Trust CEO James Cohen-Evan says that even when we first walked into these churches, it was like entering a time capsule, with beer still on the shelf and tables still set for dinner.
All right, now, so between Passover and Easter holidays and socially distancing at home, there's a lot more time and opportunity to relax with a nice glass of wine. So why not make it Israeli? For the next couple of weeks, we're going to be exploring Israel's top wineries. And first up is the world-famous Balkan. Take a look. When you think about wine, France, Spain, and Italy typically come to mind. But it's actually Israel that's one of the oldest wine regions on the planet. Locals have been producing wine here for the last 5,000 years. And today we're in Kibbutz Hulda, home to the Balkan wine cellars. This is the largest winery in all of Israel.
We are the biggest wine growers in Israel, and it's helped us to have a control about the quality of the wine that we are making. We are taking care of the wine from the ground to the bottle.
This is Balkan's largest single vineyard, but they produce about 12 to 14 million bottles of wine every year from an expansive array of vineyards across the entire country.
Barkan has over 2,500 acres of vineyards all over Israel, from across the Galilee to the Jerusalem mountains and even the Israeli desert.
Now, I wish that you guys could smell what I'm smelling right now. It is absolutely delicious. We are currently in the barrel room of the Barkan winery. There are over 6,000 barrels of wine aging in here, up to 6 months, up to a year and a half. So this is really where the magic happens. What does a chief winemaker do?
Drink lots of wine, first of all. And I'm responsible for the entire production. That means from the growing of the grapes until the bottling of the finished wine. The world of wine is so traditional, but in a big winery such as Barkan, with our focus on the different styles and the quality, I think the technology plays a major role, and it gives us the access to produce the very specific taste we want you to have and enjoy.
Visitors can actually come to see Balkan's wine cellars in action as they produce some of Israel's most popular wines. There are daily tours that allow you to visit their modern creations while learning all about the history of Israeli wine.
Israel has been producing wines for a few thousand years, probably about 5,000 years, and for certain time in history we were the largest producers in the entire world. One of the most interesting phenomena in the last years, and Barkan has been a leader in that, is the return to the roots. We are experimenting now with and producing wines from ancient varieties.
The magic of Barkan winery is that you can explore every part of Israel through our wines. Every wine that you will take off Barkan will tell you a different story about Israel.
That's it for ILTV's weekly review. See you next week.